The Cathedral of Sothmere had not opened its silver doors in 40 years. Mevra stood pressed against the cold stone of the western archway, watching torchlight pour across a sea of faces she did not know. Lords in midnight velvet, ladies in cascading silks, pack envoys from every territory between the Iron Coast and the Bone Mountains. They had come for one thing, and that thing was about to break her: the Pact of Crowns. Once a generation, when alliances frayed and old enemies grew restless, the Alpha King of Sothmere offered his hand in formal union to seal the borders. She had never imagined she would witness one from the shadows, with the king's claiming mark hidden beneath the bodice of a borrowed dress and his secret growing in her belly. She should have stayed in her chamber. Halric had warned her not to come, but Caspian had not sent for her in 11 days. No message. No whispered note left under her door. No hurried meeting in the orchard behind the kitchens, where he had first kissed her 2 years ago and called her the only true thing in his life. The silence had grown too heavy to bear, and so she had crept up the servants' stair and into the cathedral gallery. He stood at the high altar in a coat the color of storm clouds, his dark hair brushed back from a face she knew better than her own. Her body knew the rest. The way his jaw tightened when he was holding something back. The pulse beneath his ear that she had once kissed until he laughed and called her merciless. He had promised her. On the night he sank his teeth into the curve of her hip and whispered her name like a prayer, he had promised her. When the council releases its grip, when the southern treaties are signed, I will name you before the world. There is no one else. There has never been anyone else. Her free hand drifted without thought to the gentle swell beneath her gown. 8 months. 8 months of secrets carried alone, choking down nausea behind kitchen doors, pretending the loosening of her stays was nothing. Tonight she had meant to tell him. The high speaker of the cathedral lifted his pale hands. Let the offered come forward. A hush rolled across the hall. From the far side of the altar, 6 women began to walk toward the king. Daughters of the great houses, their gowns the colors of their banners. None of them frightened her the way the woman at the front of the procession did. Adrienne of House Volraine. She moved like still water moves, slow and deliberate. Her hair was the dark red of dying embers, her gown the bone white of a winter dawn. The Volraines held the salt mines and 3 of the 4 shipping routes that fed Sothmere through the cold months. Her father had been petitioning for this match since Adrienne was 16. The high speaker raised a goblet of black glass. By the old custom and the older blood, the Alpha King will receive the cup of choosing. He will drink, and he will speak, and the realm will be bound. Mevra's hand closed around the iron of the railing. Caspian took the cup. He drank, and something shifted in him. Even from the gallery she saw it. A softening that was not a softening. His shoulders, which always carried the readiness of a man expecting a blade, settled into something looser. As if the man inside the body had taken a step backward and left the body to its duties. Her mark began to burn. It was not the warm pulse she knew. This was a needle of fire driven into her hip, sudden and without mercy. She bit down on the inside of her cheek to keep from gasping aloud. Caspian of Sothmere, the high speaker said. Blood of the River Kings, last of the Sunline. The realm asks its question. Whom do you take to your side that the borders may hold, and the children of 2 houses become one? The silence stretched. It stretched the way a held breath stretches when there is no air left. Look at me, she begged, in the place inside her chest where words could not reach. Caspian, look up. Look up. I am here. I am here. He did not look up. His eyes, those eyes that had once tracked her across a crowded room, as if she were the only fixed star in a moving sky, drifted across the line of waiting women without seeing any of them. Then they returned, with the slow inevitability of a stone settling at the bottom of a well, to Adrienne of House Volraine. Adrienne, he said. The word struck her like a hand. By right and by blood I take her hand. The cathedral did not so much erupt as exhale, a great gasping cheer, layered with relief and triumph, and the long-banked ambition of 100 noble houses. Bells began to ring somewhere above, the Volraine banners unfurled along the high columns. Maevra could not hear any of it. Her vision had narrowed to a single point, the king's hand reaching for the red-headed woman at the altar. He took Adrienne's fingers in his. He raised them to his lips. The mark on Maevra's hip seared white. She made a sound she had not known a human throat could make, low and animal and broken. She doubled forward over the railing, one hand clutched around her belly as if she could shield the child inside from the sound of its father's vow. And then, a figure stepped from the crowd below. He had stood at the back, half hidden by a column, dressed in the gray traveling cloak of an envoy. Now he moved forward with the unhurried certainty of a man who had been waiting precisely for this moment, and the crowd parted before him without quite understanding why. He was tall, broader through the shoulder than Caspian. His hair was the color of wet ash, cropped close to his skull, and his face was hard the way a cliff is hard, the way deep water is cold. He climbed the dais without invitation. The high speaker faltered. Caspian turned, and for the first time his eyes seemed to focus, and a wolf-low sound built in his chest that did not entirely come from him. "Carnholt," someone whispered in the crowd. "The Carnholt king. Riven himself." Maevra had heard the name. The Alpha King of the Eastern Wolves, the one who had refused 3 offers of treaty in 5 years. He had been invited to the pact, of course. No one had expected him to come. No one had expected him to climb the dais. Riven of Carnholt did not look at Caspian. He did not look at Adrienne. He turned in a slow half-circle, and his pale eyes lifted, and they found Maevra in the gallery as cleanly as a hawk finds a hare in tall grass. She could not move. He inclined his head, the smallest possible bow. Then he spoke, and the cathedral carried his voice the way still water carries a stone. "There is a witness to this binding," he said, "to whom no one in this hall has paid honor. I would offer her my hand to descend before the cup is sealed and the night is given to celebration." The cathedral went very, very quiet. Caspian's head turned at last. His gaze followed Riven's, up into the gallery, into the shadow where Maevra stood frozen with her palm pressed to her stomach and tears already cutting down her face. For 1 heartbeat. 2. His expression did not change. He did not know her. The man who had whispered her name into her hair only 12 nights ago looked directly at her, and there was nothing behind his eyes. He looked at her the way he might have looked at a tapestry he had passed every day without noticing. Something inside Maevra that had been holding on for 11 days finally let go. She did not remember moving. She remembered only the cold of the gallery stair beneath her shoes, and then she was at the foot of the dais, and Riven of Carnholt was extending his hand toward her with the gravity of a man offering a lifeline to a drowning woman. "My lady," he said quietly, and only she could hear him. "If you do not take my hand now, you will not leave this cathedral alive tonight." She did not understand, but her body understood, and she placed her trembling fingers in his. "Walk with me," he murmured, slowly. "Smile if you can." She could not smile, but she walked. Down the long aisle of the cathedral, past the lords and ladies and their staring jeweled eyes, past the Volraine banners hanging fresh and bright. She walked beside the foreign king with her hand in his, and her heart in pieces, and her child kicking once, hard against her palm. At the silver doors, she risked one look back. Caspian stood at the altar with Adrienne's hand still in his. His head had tilted to one side, very slightly, the way a sleeping man's might when a dream begins to disturb him. His other hand had risen, halfway, as if reaching for something he could not name. Then the silver doors closed between them, and Maevra of no house, of no name, walked out of the cathedral of Sothmere on the arm of an enemy king. The night air struck her like cold water. Maevra stumbled on the cathedral steps, and Riven of Carnholt steadied her with a hand at her elbow that was strong without being rough. a black carriage waited at the foot of the stairs, drawn by 4 horses the color of soot. No crest on the door. "In," Riven said. She hesitated. "My lady, there are 6 men in that cathedral whose only purpose tonight was to ensure that you did not see the dawn. 2 of them are already moving. Get in, or the next quarter hour will end the same way for you and your child, whether you trust me or not." The word child moved through her like a struck bell. She had not told him. She had not told anyone but Winna, the old laundress who had pieced together the truth from her washwater alone. Mavra's free hand flew to her belly. "How do you—" "Later." He opened the carriage door. "Please." She stepped up. The interior was lined with black wool and smelled faintly of pine. Riven climbed in after her and rapped twice on the roof. The carriage lurched forward before she had settled. The cathedral fell behind them, then the lit windows of the great houses. The horses' hooves rang against frozen cobbles. Mevra finally found her voice. "Who sent the men?" "Volraine. Or someone who shares Volraine's interests." "Why?" He looked at her, fully, for the first time. His eyes in the carriage lamp were the color of weathered slate. "Because Caspian of Sothmere has worn a claiming mark on his shoulder for nearly 2 years, and tonight he stood at an altar and pretended he did not. A man does not walk into that kind of lie alone. Someone arranged it. And anyone who arranges a thing like that must arrange the inconvenient witness as well." His mouth tightened. "Forgive my plainness. There is no kind way to say what was about to happen to you." "You knew about the mark?" "I have had eyes in the Sothmere court for 3 years. The bond between you was visible across the cathedral. To anyone with the sight to see it, the fact that no one in that hall acknowledged it told me everything I needed to know." Mavra pressed her hands together. "He looked at me. He did not know me." "No, he did not." "Why?" "That is the question I have spent the last 6 months trying to answer." She turned her face to him. 6 months? 6 months ago, I received a letter. Anonymous. Posted from inside the Sothmere Palace. It told me that the Alpha King of Sothmere was about to be moved against by his own court, that a foreign alpha would do well to be present when it happened, and that a particular woman would need protection on a particular night. The letter did not give your name. It described your hair, your voice, the room you slept in. It was not signed. Who? I do not know. Whoever wrote it knew you well enough to fear for you, and feared the court too much to write their own name. Winna, Mavra thought, with a swift, painful certainty. Winna, who had folded her stained linens and never once met her eyes about it. Winna, who had pressed dried mint into her palm and said only, "Steady, child. Steady." She did not say the name aloud. "What do you want from me?" she asked instead. "Nothing tonight," he said. "Tonight you need a fire and a meal and a bed that is not in that city. We are riding for the Eastern Road. I have a hunting lodge 2 days from here. You will be safe there while you decide what comes next." "And after I decide?" "That depends on what you decide." She studied his hard face. There was no warmth in it. There was also, she realized, no hunger. "You are not telling me everything," she said. "No," he agreed, without apology. "I am not. You have had one of the worst nights of your life. There will be time." The carriage rolled on into the dark. After a while, Mevra realized she was crying, soundlessly. Riven took a folded square of dark cloth from his coat and laid it on the seat beside her, and he turned his face toward the window, and he gave her the gift of pretending not to see. By the time they reached the edge of the lowlands, the cathedral bells of Sothmere were no longer audible. 2 days later, in a stone lodge above a half-frozen river, Mevra of No House wrote a letter. She did not address it. She did not sign it. She folded it 3 times and pressed it into the fire and watched the words. "I waited for you" turn into a curl of black ash that lifted up the chimney and vanished. Then she pulled her cloak around her shoulders and walked out into the snow under a different name. She told the woman at the kitchen door her name was Sarah. She told herself she was no one. And in a tower 300 miles to the west, a man woke from a dream he could not remember, with his hand pressed to a shoulder that burned as if it had been branded, and a name on his tongue that he could not place. The village of Brindleford was 3 valleys deep into the eastern hills, where the maps grew vague and the merchants stopped coming. 5 months later, it had nearly forgotten that a stranger had ever arrived. Sarah, the soft-spoken woman who had appeared at the close of winter with a swollen belly, and a husband she said had drowned in the spring floods, had become simply the herb wife by the willow bend. The miller's wife had her teas for sleeping. The shepherd's youngest had her salve for a burn. Old Tobin, who could not lift his left arm after the harvest, had her quiet hands on his shoulder twice a week, and the slow return of strength to thank her for. No one asked too many questions. The hill people understood grief. Mevra had chosen the name herself. Sarah had been her mother's name. Her child had come within weeks of her arrival. A boy. Small, too small at first, but fierce, with a cry that brought every dog in Brindleford to its feet. The midwife had wrapped him in linen and placed him in Mavra's arms. He has the look of a fighter, this one. Mavra had wept for an hour without knowing why. She had named him Idris because she could not bear to name him after his father. He was 4 months old now. He had his father's dark hair and his father's level gaze, and a small crescent birthmark on his left shoulder that Mavra refused to look at for too long at a time. The mark on her own hip had not faded. Among the wolf-blooded, a claiming bite was meant to be a fragile and beautiful thing. Severed by rejection or by the choice of another partner, it dissolved within weeks, leaving only a faint silver scar to remember it by. Every healer's manual she had ever read agreed on this. 5 months had passed since Caspian had spoken Adrienne's name in the cathedral. The mark on Maevra's hip looked, if anything, darker than the night he had given it. Some nights she could swear it pulsed, as if on the other side of an enormous distance someone was searching, reaching, failing to find her and trying again. She refused to name what it was. Naming it would make it real. Hope is the cruelest of all medicines, her mother had once said. It cures nothing, and it kills the patient slowly. Mevra mixed her teas, and salved her burns and rocked her son, and did not let herself hope. It was on a gray autumn afternoon, with the willows turning gold and Idris asleep against her shoulder, that she first felt the shape of the world begin to change. The shepherd boy Wenrick came pelting down the lane, breathless. He skidded to a stop at her gate. "Mistress Sarah, there's news at the Crossroads Inn. Riders down from the high road. They're saying, 'Slow down, Wen. Breathe.' They're saying the king's lost his wits." The bottom dropped out of Mavra's chest. "Which king?" "Sothmere, mistress. Caspian. They say he's torn through his own council, that he's sent riders to every village in 3 kingdoms looking for someone. A woman. They say there's a price for her. 20,000 pieces of silver." The number sounded made up. She knew it was not. "Looking for her how?" "They say his wolves have been ranging east. They were in Hollowby last week." "Hollowby, mistress? And there's something else. They said the queen, the new queen, the Volraine one. She's in confinement at the palace, that the king won't see her." Idris stirred against her shoulder. Mevra pressed her cheek to his soft hair to hide the tremor in her jaw. "Thank you, Wenrick. Off home with you now." The boy hesitated, sensing something in her face he could not read, then nodded and ran on. Hollowby was 9 miles from Brindleford. The mark on her hip throbbed once, hard like a second heart beating beneath her skin. She closed her door and slid the iron bolt into place. She laid Idris in his cradle and watched the small rise and fall of his chest. Then she walked to the window and looked out at the willows. A man stood at the far edge of her garden, in the shadow of the willow itself, half screened by the falling gold leaves, tall, cloaked, still as a hunting bird. When her eyes met his across the yard, he did not move. He simply inclined his head, very slightly. The smallest possible bow. Riven of Carnholt had found her again, Somewhere east of the Iron Brook, a great dark wolf lifted its head and breathed in deep, and turned its scarred face toward the only direction that had ever mattered, and began, at last, to run. Mavra did not open the door. She stood at the window with her hand pressed flat against the cold glass and watched Riven of Carnholt watch her. Behind her, in his cradle, Idris breathed the small, even breaths of a child who did not yet know his world had a hairline crack running through it. Then she unbolted the door and stepped out onto the threshold, leaving Idris asleep behind her. Riven crossed the yard in unhurried strides. Up close, in the autumn light, he looked older than she remembered, not in the face, but in the eyes. "My lady," he said, "that title is not mine. It will be again." He stopped a respectful pace from her threshold. "May I speak with you?" "Walk with me," she said. She set off along the lane that ran behind her cottage. He fell into step beside her. He did not offer his arm. He had learned that she did not want to be touched. "How did you find me?" "I never lost you. When you left the lodge, I had 2 riders follow at distance until you were settled. After that, I gave instructions that you not be approached. I have known where you were. I have not come until now because there has not been a reason that justified the risk. And now there is. Now there is." They walked a little way in silence. "Tell me," she said. "Caspian is dying." Mavra kept walking. She could not, for several breaths, feel her own feet against the path. "What?" "Not by blade, not by poison. He is dying the way wolves die when their bond is broken and not severed. Slowly, inwardly. He has not slept in 4 nights. He has not eaten in 2. The wedding to Adriana Volraine was performed by proxy and never consummated. He has not allowed her into the same wing of the palace as himself since the morning after the cathedral. The Volraines are demanding her installation as regent on the grounds that the king is unfit. Half the noble houses are with them." "He chose her," Mavra said flatly. "He did not." She stopped walking. "He drank the cup." He spoke her name. "I was there, Riven." "You saw the cup. You did not see what was in it." The afternoon light went very still around them. "There is a compound," he said, "that has not been brewed in living memory. It does not kill. It sets a man at a small distance from himself for the space of an hour and softens him towards suggestion. A capable speaker beside him can shape his words during that hour, and the man will speak them in his own voice, and not know afterward that he did. The records call it the sleeping speech." Mevra had gone cold to her fingertips. "You think someone gave him this?" "I know someone did. The high speaker of the cathedral has been a Volraine cousin for 16 years. The cup was filled in his vestry." "Then why has no one—" "Because the only proof of the sleeping speech is the inside of the drinker's own skull, my lady, and the drinker, in this case, has not been able to make a coherent argument in front of his own counsel since the morning the bond first tore him open." Mevra pressed both hands to her face. "He woke," Riven said softly behind her. "He woke that same morning and asked his beta where you were. By name. He had no memory of the cathedral at all. He has been searching for you since the hour he understood what had been taken from him." 20,000 pieces of silver, she whispered. "Yes." "Hollowby." "Yes. And here, by tomorrow night, I think. The bond is guiding him." Mavra lowered her hands. "Then why are you telling me first? Why are you here, Riven, and not him?" He did not answer at once. "Because there is a second piece of news," he said. "And it is the piece that has brought me here in person. Tell me." "The Volraines have not been idle while the king has been searching. 3 weeks ago they signed an alliance with the border lords of the south. 2 weeks ago they hired a company called the Long Knives. They are not soldiers. They are the men who are paid to do the things that armies cannot be seen to do. And the Long Knives have been in Brindleford for 2 days." The world tilted very gently. "Where?" she said. "3 of them are at the Crossroads Inn. 2 more came in last night and took the upper room above the chandler's shop. The 6th is a woman who has been working in the kitchens of the inn for 9 days under the name Galwin. They are waiting." For what? For the king to arrive. Mavra's breath stopped. They want him to find me. They want him to find your body. They want him to find it in his arms. They want the realm to see an Alpha King reduced to a man weeping over the dead while a Volraine queen waits in the capital with the throne already warm. They have planned this very carefully. They are not, however, the only people in this valley who are good at what they do. He turned, and from the inside of his cloak he drew a short, curved horn of black bone. My wolves have been in these hills for 6 weeks. 16 of them. They will not be visible to the Long Knives until the moment I want them to be. But I will not move on those men without your knowledge and your consent. You are asking me to choose. I am asking you to know. She stared at the black horn in his hand. Riven, why are you doing this? Truly, tell me. He looked at her, and she saw something move in his hard face that was not strategy. Because 9 years ago, he said, my sister was bound by a man who chose another. Not by the sleeping speech, by his own free will. My sister was carrying his child. She was lost to us within the week. On a winter road in country no one should have walked alone. We did not find her until the spring melt. I have made it the work of my life that no other woman in any kingdom that touches mine will be lost for the same reason. The wind moved through the willows. Mevra closed her eyes. When she opened them, she said, take the men at the inn tonight. Quietly. Before Caspian crosses the brook. And then I will decide what comes after. He inclined his head, the same small bow he had given her in the cathedral. He turned to go. Riven. He paused. Your sister's name? Lyona. I am sorry. So am I, my lady, every day. He walked back down the lane the way he had come. She stood in the gold afternoon and watched him until he had passed the last of the willows. Then she went inside, and she lifted Idris from his cradle, and she sat down with her son in her lap and pressed her face into his small, dark hair. And at last, for the first time in 5 months, she allowed herself to weep without trying to stop. Somewhere east of the Iron Brook, a black wolf was running through the cold grass. Halric of Sothmere had been Caspian's beta for 19 years. He had thought foolishly that he had seen the worst of what loving a king could ask of a man. He had not. The worst was riding 300 miles in 5 days behind an alpha who had not slept and whose wolf was no longer entirely a wolf. Knowing that if they did not reach the bond at the end of this trail by the next moonrise, the man he had served for 2 decades would be gone from this world, and something far older and far less merciful would be wearing his shape. They reached the ridge above Brindleford an hour before sunset. Caspian stopped his horse so abruptly that Halric's mount nearly walked into the back of it. The alpha sat motionless in the saddle, his head lifted, his ungloved hand closed white-knuckled around the pommel. She is here, he said. His voice had not been entirely his own for days. Halric, she is here. Yes, sire. Down there, past the second bend, the cottage with the willows. Halric had ridden over half a kingdom with this man. He did not ask how Caspian knew. Sire, it is 2 hours yet to dark. We agreed to wait for dusk. I cannot wait for dusk. Sire. Halric. Caspian turned his head, and what Halric saw in the king's eyes was not a thing that could be reasoned with. The amber had gone out of them. They were the flat hot gold of a wolf at the end of a long hunger. There is a child. Halric's heart stopped. What? There is a child in that cottage. I can feel him. He is mine. Halric thought very fast. 6 strangers in Brindleford, 3 at the inn, 2 above the chandler, 1 in the kitchens. He thought about how his king would react if 6 paid blades came at him while he was crossing an open lane toward the woman and the child he had been searching for since the spring. Sire, if I am to keep them safe, I need you to do exactly as I say for the next hour. Dismount. We will come to the cottage from the wood. You will let me go to the door first. You will stand in the trees until I call you. If you go to that door now, in that state, in daylight, with the wolf this close to the surface, the woman who has been hiding from you for 5 months will not open it. She will run. Do you understand me, sire? For one terrible heartbeat, Halric thought the king was not going to answer. Then Caspian dismounted. They went down through the wood on foot. Caspian moved through the autumn trees the way a starving man moves toward a lit kitchen, without grace, without pace, only forward. At the edge of the willows, Halric put his hand on his king's chest and pressed. "Wait here. Trust me." The wolf in Caspian snarled, not quite audibly. The man in him won. "Hurry," Caspian said. Halric crossed the yard alone. The door opened before he reached it. Mevra stood on the threshold with a kitchen knife held low against her thigh and an infant on her hip. She did not speak. She looked at his face, and past him at the willows, and at his face again, and she lowered the knife. "Halric." "My lady." "Where is he?" "In the trees. I asked him to wait." She closed her eyes. "How bad?" "Bad, my lady. As bad as a man can be and still be a man." She looked down at the child on her hip. The child looked back at Halric with very large, very grave eyes that were not Mevra's. Halric found that he could not breathe, briefly, for an entirely different reason. "His name is Idris," Mevra said quietly. "My lady? Tell me about the cathedral, Halric. I need to hear it from you, not from a Karnholt king." Halric drew breath. He had rehearsed this confession for 150 nights. He had not believed he would ever be granted the chance to make it. "I saw him drink the cup, my lady. I saw his eyes change as he drank. I saw him speak the wrong name in a voice that was not entirely his own. I saw a Karnholt king take your hand, because I was not standing close enough to take it myself, and for that, I will be sorry to my grave. I saw your room 3 hours later, empty. I saw the mark on his shoulder weeping like a wound. I saw him on the floor of his own bedchamber on the 3rd morning when the drug let go of him, calling for you in a voice I will hear in my sleep until I die. I have been part of every stupid thing this court has done in 19 years, my lady, and the only one I will not be forgiven for is failing to walk you out of that cathedral myself. I have come to ask for the chance to do it now." Mevra was crying without sound. Idris reached up and patted her chin with one small, fat hand. "Bring him in," she said. Halric turned and lifted his hand to the willows. Caspian came across the yard like a man walking through fire to reach a door on the other side of it. He did not run. He could not. He had only enough left in him to put one foot in front of the other. By the time he reached the threshold, his face was wet. He had not noticed. He stopped a pace from Mevra. He looked at her. He looked at the child. He went down on his knees on the cottage step. He did not reach for either of them. He simply knelt, with his head bowed and his hands open at his sides, in the posture of a man surrendering a sword he no longer believed he had the right to hold. "Mevra," he said. His voice was gone. It came out as breath shaped into her name. "Mevra, Mevra, Mevra." The bond between them flared. Mevra felt it as a tide rising in her chest, a tide that had been pulling at the inside of her ribs for 150 days. She felt his exhaustion, his shame, his fear, the wolf at the back of his throat begging her not to send them away. She felt, beneath all of that, the unbroken thread that had refused for 5 months to fray. She did not say, "I forgive you." It was not yet that kind of moment. She said, "Stand up, Caspian. You are frightening your son." He lifted his head. Idris regarded his father with the sober interest of a child who had not yet learned to be afraid of anything in the world. Caspian made a sound that did not have a name and stood up slowly, the way a man stands up after a very long illness. Mevra reached out one hand, the hand without the knife, and touched his jaw with her fingertips. Just once. Just the briefest of contacts. It was enough to nearly undo him. "Inside," she said, "both of you. There are things you need to know, and we do not have much time." She had not finished the word time when the first arrow split the doorframe 2 inches above her head. Halric moved before the arrow had finished quivering in the wood. He swept Mevra and the child sideways through the doorway and drew his sword in the same motion, shouting a word that was not language so much as command. From the willows came an answering howl, then another. The Sothmere wolves had been waiting in the wood for exactly this. So, Mevra realized as the second arrow punched through the shutter, had others. The long knives came out of the lane at the back of the cottage, 3 of them on foot, blades drawn, faces hidden behind plain gray cloth. The one in the lead carried a short crossbow with a black iron bolt already nocked, and the bolt was aimed at the cottage window where Idris had been a heartbeat before. Caspian took him down before he could fire. The shift was not the ceremonial half-second transformation of a king before his court. It was the snapping open of something that had been chained too long. One moment, Caspian stood inside the cottage doorway. The next, a wolf the color of wet coal hurtled through the open frame, and the man with the crossbow was down before he could lift it. The other 2 long knives faltered. It was the only mistake Halric needed. He met the second man at the corner of the cottage and brought him down with one clean stroke. The third turned to run. 2 of Halric's wolves came out of the willows at full speed and reached him at the gate. From the lane on the other side came shouting. The long knives at the inn had heard the howls. They were coming. Mevra had Idris pressed against her shoulder. Her free hand had found the bone-handled knife in her apron pocket without her telling it to. "The cellar!" Halric called from outside. "My lady, the cellar." "There is no cellar." "Behind the hearth," said a voice from the doorway, and Riven of Carnholt stepped into the cottage with his sword drawn and 3 of his eastern wolves at his back. "Move the iron grate, there is a passage. I cut it the second week you were here." Caspian, in wolf form, rounded on him with a snarl that shook the rafters. "Brother of Sothmere," Riven said evenly, "we will resolve our quarrel after. There are 8 of them in the lane." For a heartbeat the cottage hung in stillness. Then Caspian turned his great head, looked once at Mevra, once at Idris, and threw himself back through the doorway into the fight. Mevra dragged the iron grate aside. Beneath it was a square of darkness and the top of a wooden ladder. "Down," Riven said. She climbed down with one arm around her son and the knife between her teeth. She crouched at the bottom in the dark and pressed Idris against her chest and listened, above her, to a small war being fought across the threshold of her home. She heard Halric shout. She heard wolves, more than she could count. She heard a woman scream, briefly, and stop. Galwin, she thought, and felt no pity. The bond pulsed. Caspian was hurt, not dying, but hurt enough that the pain of it reached her through the dark and the clay and the wood, and her body, without consulting her, did something she had not known it could do. It lit. A pale gold light bloomed along the inside of her arms, thin as breath, brighter than any candle. It was not heat. It was the same thing she had felt when she sat old Tobin's shoulder, only larger. Vastly larger. As if all the small mercies she had given to the people of Brindleford had been a single tide pool, and the sea behind it had now decided to remember itself. Idris stretched out one hand toward the light. It pooled against his palm and did not burn him. Mevra understood, without being told, that she had been suppressing this for as long as she had been alive. Her grandmother had been a hill healer, the kind the southern temples had hunted in her great-grandmother's time. Mevra's mother had warned her on the last night of her life. "Healing is allowed, child. Hands and herbs, anything brighter than that, and they will come for you." It was here now. She climbed the ladder one-handed, her son cradled against her shoulder, the gold light spilling from her arms. When her head came up through the opening, the cottage was full of bodies. Halric was on one knee against the hearth wall, his sword still in his hand, a long red gash along his thigh. 2 of Riven's wolves were down and not moving. Riven himself stood by the doorway, pale, with one arm pressed against his ribs and blood seeping black between his fingers. Beyond the doorway, the great dark wolf that was Caspian stood over the last of the long knives with his sides heaving and a deep tear along his flank. She walked first to Halric, and she put her glowing hand on his thigh, and the bleeding stopped. She walked to Riven, and she put her glowing hand on his ribs, and his face went briefly slack with relief. "My lady, save it for him. I will mend. I have enough." She mended Riven's ribs in 2 breaths, then she crossed the threshold into the yard. Caspian did not move as she approached. His eyes followed her, His great head sank until it nearly touched the ground. She knelt in the trampled grass beside him and put her hand on the torn flank, and the gold light went from her into him, and she felt the bond between them, which had been a thread for 5 months, become a rope. He shifted under her hand. The wolf folded inward, the man unfolded outward, and suddenly it was Caspian on his knees beside her, naked to the waist where his coat had torn. The long wound on his side already closed to a silver line, his face pressed into the curve of her shoulder. He was shaking. She put her hand on the back of his neck. Idris regarded his father over the curve of his mother's collarbone and made a small noise that was almost a laugh. Caspian, who had not laughed in 5 months, made a wrecked, broken sound that was almost won back. But the next thing did not happen yet, because at the far end of the lane, a column of riders had appeared in the lengthening light. 20 of them, 40, more. The banner at their head was bone white, and on it, dark against the cloth, was the salt and thorn crest of House Volraine. "Sire," Halric said quietly from the doorway. Caspian lifted his head from Mavra's shoulder. His eyes, when they met hers, were once again the color she remembered from the orchard behind the kitchens, 2 years ago. "Inside," he said hoarsely, "all of you, now." He stood, lifting her with him, and they went into the cottage together as the last of the autumn light failed in the west, and the first of the Volraine riders crossed the brook. The cottage door closed behind them, and for the space of 3 breaths, the world narrowed to the room. Halric set the iron bar across the door. Riven moved to the shutters and worked them tight. Mevra stood in the middle of her own kitchen with her son in her arms and the husband she had not married a pace from her side. "Sarah," she said quietly to Idris, "is going to put you down for a little while." She crossed to the cradle by the hearth. She laid him in it. She tucked the wool blanket around his small feet. She breathed. Then she turned to Caspian. "Speak. I have waited 5 months. I am not waiting another minute." Caspian did not sit. He did not move from the spot where he had stopped just inside the door. "I do not remember the cathedral." "I know." "Halric has told you?" "Riven has told me first. Halric has told me again. I want to hear it from you." He flinched, faintly, at the rival king's name. He did not argue. "I remember the morning of the cathedral. I remember dressing. I remember the cup. I remember it was bitter. I remember the first words of the speaker. After that I remember nothing until I woke, 3 days later on the floor of my own bedchamber with the mark on my shoulder bleeding through my shirt. The first word I said was your name. I have not slept a full night since. Tell me." The first month I tore through every record in the palace looking for who had filled the cup. The second month I rode every village within 4 days of the capital. By the third I was riding without sleeping. By the fourth I was no longer riding as a man. I dreamed of you nightly. I dreamed you were in a kitchen by a brook, with willows, and you were holding something I could not see, and you were singing, and you would not turn to look at me. Halric has been moving us east on the strength of that dream ever since. Mavra's throat closed. "I sang," she said, "to Idris, while he was still inside me, by the brook. There are willows. I know. You felt me. Every day. I did not know I was feeling you. I thought I was losing my mind." She made a small sound that was not laughter but was its near relative. "And her." He did not pretend not to know who she meant. "I have not touched her. I have not been alone in a room with her since the morning I woke. She has been confined to the south wing under my beta's guard. She has written me 41 letters. I have not read any of them. The marriage was performed by proxy because I refused to stand a second time before the High Speaker. It was not consummated, because I would have lost the wolf entirely before I let her hand near me. I saw your face, in the cathedral, when you looked up at the gallery. Your eyes. I know. They were empty. There was every part of me that knew you, and not one of them could reach my mouth. Mevra. I would rather have been struck dumb. I would rather have been struck blind. I would rather have lost my crown on the altar steps than have stood there and made my face do what it did to you. There is no apology that I have a right to offer you. I am offering you, instead, every day of my life from this one to my last, and I am asking you to take them, because I do not know what else I have." She stood very still. The bond between them, which had been a rope an hour ago in the yard, had become a cable. She could feel his shame in her own chest. She could feel his love, vast and unhinged, beating against the inside of her ribs as if it had been waiting for the door to open. "I loved you in the orchard. I loved you in the kitchens. I loved you in the gallery when I thought you had thrown me away. I loved you in this kitchen for 5 months while I poured out tea for other people's children. I love you now, Caspian." I tried to stop. I could not. "I am tired of trying. Come here." He crossed the room. He did not embrace her. He stopped a hand's breadth from her, and he lifted both hands very slowly and laid them on either side of her face. "Say it again." "I love you." "Again." "I love you." "Again, Mevra. Please. I have not heard it for 5 months. I love you. I love you. I have always loved you. I will go on loving you until they put me in the ground. Caspian." He bent his forehead to hers. They stood like that in the kitchen of a cottage that did not belong to her, by a hearth where a child slept in a cradle, while in the lane outside, the hooves of 40 horses came on in the dusk. It was Riven who broke the silence. "My lady." "Sire, the column has crossed the brook." Caspian straightened. His hands fell from her face. He kept his fingers, lightly, against the side of her wrist. "How many?" 40 horse, 2 wagons behind. A second column of foot is half a mile back. They mean to surround the cottage by full dark." "They mean," said Halric quietly from the door, "to take her alive, sire. The long knives were the contingency. This column is the plan. They will offer to negotiate. They will give you terms you cannot accept. Then they will burn the cottage and they will pull you off her body, and they will ride to the capital with the corpse of an heir wrapped in a Volraine cloak." Caspian's hand tightened briefly against Mevra's wrist. "Sothmere wolves." 12, sire, plus the 4 that came down through the wood with us. Carnholt wolves. Riven did not turn from the window. 16 in these hills. 4 more an hour out at the high road. They will not arrive in time for the first hour. Then we hold for 1 hour. "No," Mevra said. Both kings turned to look at her. "No, we do not hold. Mevra, I will not have my son grow up in a cottage that was set on fire to save him. I will not have you, Caspian, kill 40 men in my dooryard so that the village I have lived in for 5 months has to bury bodies. We do not hold the cottage. We ride out." "Out where?" "To the capital. Tonight. Before the second column arrives. We ride past their first column under their own banner, because their own banner is at the front of it, and no one will stop the men carrying it. We ride for Sothmere. We ride for your hall, Caspian. We do not negotiate with Volraine outside it. We negotiate with him inside it, in front of the council, with me on my feet, and Idris in my arms, and a Carnholt king, and a Sothmere beta at our backs, and the mark on your shoulder open for every wolf in that room to see." The kitchen held its breath. "You are asking me," Caspian said slowly, "to take you into the place where they tried to kill you. I am telling you that they tried to kill me here, where there are no witnesses. They will not try in the Hall of the Sunline, where there are 800. The hall is the only safe place left in the kingdom for the woman who is your true mate. Take me home, Caspian." He looked at her. Then he turned to Halric. "Saddle every horse in the village we can buy. Pay the prices the owners ask and twice over. We ride in 1 hour. The Queen of Sothmere goes home tonight." Halric was already moving. Riven of Carnholt by the window lifted his head. His pale eyes met Mevra's, and for the first time since she had known him, there was something almost like a smile in them. "My lady, I told you in a carriage 5 months ago that I had not yet decided which side I was on. You may consider me decided." They rode out under the Volraine banner. Halric had taken it from the second of the long knives, and now it hung above the column of riders that was leaving Brindleford in the dusk. To anyone watching from the lane, they were a Volraine patrol returning to its captains with a captured woman wrapped in a grey cloak and an infant in her arms. The Volraine column saw their own banner coming down the lane and parted to let it pass. Their captain lifted his hand in the salute his order used among themselves. Halric returned it without raising his head. By the time the captain had registered the second oddity that the men passing him were not men he knew, the rear of their column was already beyond his bowshot. He shouted. His column began, raggedly, to turn. By then, Halric had drawn rein and barked a single word, and every Sothmere wolf and every Carnholt wolf within hearing had broken from the trees on either side of the lane and fallen on the rear of the Volraine column at full speed. The fight in the lane was not long. Caspian had Mevra's mare by the bridle and was riding her hard along the eastern road, with Riven's flank shielding her on the right and Halric's on the left, and they did not slow until the moon had risen. They rode for 2 days. By the second dawn, the 4 Carnholt wolves who had been an hour out at the high road had caught up with them. Word had traveled ahead of them by methods Mevra did not fully understand. People came out to the roadside to look at her. They did not cheer. They stood in their doorways with their hats in their hands, and several of them made a small old gesture toward Idris in her arms that Mevra had only ever seen at the cradles of children, born to women her grandmother had loved. The capital came up at the end of the 3rd day, white-walled and bell-towered. The gates were open. They had been ordered open, Halric explained quietly, in the expectation that the column returning down the eastern road was a Volraine column, carrying the body of a hill healer and her child. The council had planned a public reception. Volraine had planned a coronation. Neither had planned for the column to be led by the king himself, with a woman in a grey cloak riding at his right hand, and an infant against her shoulder and a foreign alpha king at his left. The streets emptied as they passed. They rode past the cathedral. She did not look at it. Into the courtyard of the palace, and up the long sweep of pale stone steps to the doors of the Hall of the Sun Line. The doors were closed. Caspian dismounted. He laid the flat of his hand against them. He said, very quietly, "Open." There was the sound of bars being lifted from the inside. The doors swung outward. The Hall of the Sun Line spread before them in lamplight, packed wall to wall with the noble houses of Sothmere. On the dais at the far end stood Lord Andren of House Volraine, with his hand on the back of a carved chair that had not been a throne at the start of the day, but had clearly been positioned to become one by the end of it. In the chair sat Adrienne. She was wearing a crown. It was not the Sunline crown. It was a thinner, newer thing, set with white stones and worked in pale gold, and Mevra recognized it at once because she had seen the design 2 years earlier in a sketch tucked into a Volraine ledger. Caspian did not stop. He walked the length of the hall with Mevra at his right, Idris in her arms, Riven at his left, and Halric a pace behind. The wolves of both kings spread along the walls without being told. The nobles parted for them by reflex. He stopped at the foot of the dais. "Get out of that chair," he said, "before I take it out from under you." The hall did not breathe. Adrienne did not move. Lord Andren smiled the faint diplomatic smile of a man who had prepared for many possible versions of this evening. "Your Majesty, we had not been told to expect you." "I know what you had been told. I know who told you. I know who fills your cups. Get out of that chair, Andren. I will not say it again." "Your Majesty is unwell. The council has been concerned for many months. The proxy marriage of my daughter to the throne was undertaken precisely so that, in your continued indisposition..." Caspian shifted. Not fully. Only enough that the hall saw the king's eyes go gold for one heartbeat, and the lords of 3 of the great houses standing along the side wall stepped backward without realizing that they had. "Mevra," Caspian said, without turning his head. She stepped up beside him. "Idris." She lifted the child slightly so that the hall could see his face. This is the Queen of Sothmere, who is bound to me by mark and by mate, who has carried my heir through 5 months of exile because of the Volraine cup at the cathedral, and who has come back to this hall tonight with my child in her arms. Every man and woman in this hall who wishes to be standing at the end of the next quarter hour will sit down. Now. The hall sat down. Andren did not. Your Majesty, with respect, the cathedral was witnessed by 800. The cathedral was poisoned. By you. By your cousin in the vestry. The sleeping speech, Andren. I have a cup. I have a vestry boy. I have a confession from a Volraine cousin in a cell 3 streets from this hall who has not yet stopped talking. I have the brewer. I have you. What I do not yet have is your daughter's part. She will tell us herself, in front of this hall. Or I will let my beta tell us instead. Halric. Halric stepped forward. He drew from inside his coat a thin sheaf of folded letters tied with a black ribbon. 41 letters, sire, from Lady Adrienne, to her father. Letter the 6th includes the line. He is harder to manage than we anticipated, father. The dosage may need to be increased. Letter the 11th suggests, in plain words, that Mistress Mavra and the child be located before the king's recovery makes that location impossible. Letter the 19th names the captain of the Long Knives by his given name. Adrienne had gone the color of paper. Get out of that chair, Caspian said. I will not say it a 3rd time. She stood up. She lifted her hands very slowly and took the crown from her hair and laid it on the seat behind her. She walked down the dais steps without looking at her father. She walked the length of the hall the way Mavra had walked it 5 months before, only in the opposite direction, and at the doors she stopped and turned and looked, finally, at the woman she had nearly destroyed. She did not speak. She bowed. It was the bow of a woman who had been raised to bow only to thrones, and who had just understood that there was one in front of her after all. Then she went out through the doors of the Hall of the Sunline. Andren did not get the chance to follow her. Halric had already crossed the dais. Andren went to the cells before the hall had finished emptying. He did not go quietly. The high speaker of the cathedral was found by the 2nd hour of the night in a cellar beneath his own vestry with a Volraine seal in his pocket, and a confession already half-written on the table. The brewer of the cup was found in a fishing village on the northern coast within 3 days. The threads, having been pulled, did not stop unraveling. Mavra did not see any of this. She was carried by then to the wing of the palace that had been hers in stolen hours 2 years before, and she was washed, and she was fed, and she was sat in a deep chair by a fire the size of a doorway, with Idris asleep in her lap, and Caspian on the floor at her feet, with his head against her knee. It was nearly midnight when Riven of Carnholt knocked at the door. He came in alone. He had washed. He had changed into a plain, dark coat that had no banner on it. He stopped 2 paces inside the room. My lady, sire, I will not keep you. I came to take my leave. Caspian lifted his head from her knee. You will not stay the night. My wolves are camped outside the eastern gate. We will ride at dawn. I have been 5 months out of my own kingdom. I came to say something, sire, that I believe you have a right to hear from me directly. Caspian rose to his feet and faced him. Speak. I came to your cathedral 5 months ago because of a letter sent from inside your palace. I tell you this because I want it on the record between us, plainly, that I did not come to take your queen. I came because someone in your house knew what was going to happen to her and could not stop it from inside. I took her hand at the foot of the altar because I believed, and still believe, that if I had not, she would not have survived the hour. I have been her shield, sire, and not her suitor. Caspian looked at him. Then he stepped forward, and he extended his hand. I believe it. I owe you my wife, Riven of Carnholt. I owe you my son. I owe you my throne. Carnholt has, from this night, no border with us that needs a guard, and no treaty with us that needs renewing, for as long as you wear your crown and my line wears ours. Riven took the hand. They held the grip a beat longer than custom required, and when Riven released it, he turned to Mavra and went down on one knee, briefly. My lady, I am glad to have been wrong about your house in the end. There is a house. It is this one. May it stand 1,000 years. Riven, your sister. Yes, my lady. What was her child called? He did not answer at once. Then, quietly, Idris. Mavra closed her eyes. She opened them. She lifted the sleeping boy from her lap. She crossed to the rival Alpha King who had carried her out of a cathedral on a night when no one else would, and she laid her son for the space of 3 breaths in his arms. Riven held the child very carefully. He pressed his forehead, very lightly, to the small dark hair. He said something to the boy in a language Mevra did not know. Then he gave the child back to her, and he bowed once to Caspian, and he went out of the room without looking back. Mevra stood with her son against her shoulder. Caspian. Yes? It is time. He did not need to ask for what. He came to her. She laid Idris in the cradle and she turned to her king. He had taken off his coat. The mark she had given him on the night she had been claimed in return, the mark that had been bleeding for 5 months and would not close, lay open along the curve of his shoulder, dark against his skin in the firelight. She set her hands on either side of his face. You are mine. Yes. You have always been mine. Yes. I was yours from the orchard, Caspian. I am yours now. I will be yours when our son has sons. Bend your head. He bent his head. She set her teeth into the curve of his shoulder, where the unfinished mark had wept for 150 days, and she completed it. The bond closed. It did not close the way she had expected. It closed like a door that had been left open in a winter house for half a year, and that someone had at last walked across the room and shut so that the warmth could begin, finally, to gather. She felt him, all of him, the boy at 6, watching his father die in a field. The young man at 20, standing for the first time in the hall of the Sun Line. The king at 28, in an orchard, looking at a girl he had no political reason to look at, and understanding that his life had just rearranged itself around her. He felt her. The orphan girl in the records office, the young healer hiding her hands, the girl in the orchard who had thought, he will not look at me twice. The woman in the gallery who had decided in a single breath that she would carry the child alone. The mother in the cottage who had sung at midnight to a baby who did not yet know his own name. When she lifted her mouth from his shoulder, he was weeping quietly with his eyes closed. Open them. He opened them. She had expected the gold of the wolf. She had expected the amber of the king. What she saw in the firelight was simply the brown of a man's eyes, calm and exhausted and at home. Mevra. Caspian. Tell me his second name. She had not given Idris a second name. She had been waiting. She understood now. Without knowing, she was waiting. Caspian. He drew a slow breath that came out as something close to a laugh. He will hate that when he is 12. He will get over it. He pulled her against him gently. She rested her forehead against his collarbone. The mark on her hip, which had been dark and hungry for 5 months, settled, finally, into the warm, even pulse she remembered from the orchard. In the cradle by the fire, Idris Caspian of Sothmere slept on, and did not yet know that his name had finally been given to him in full. Spring came late to Sothmere that year. The trial of Houseful Rain ran through the cold months and into the thaw. Andrin faced the king's justice before the first crocus and did not return from it. Adrienne, by the king's own ruling against the council's wishes, was spared. She was sent to a women's house on the northern coast, stripped of her name and her lands and her wolf, and given the work of laundering the linens of a charity hospital for the rest of her natural days. The council called the sentence soft. The king called it the worst thing he could think to do to a woman who had been raised to believe that her worth lay in the chair she sat in, and the council, in time, came to agree. The High Speaker died in his cell before the trial reached him. The brewer of the cup, an old woman in a fishing village, who had not, in fact, known what her recipe was being used for, was pardoned and given a pension and a cottage on the coast. The recipe, by royal decree, was burned along with every copy that could be found. Weena the laundress was found, by Halric, in the south wing of the palace 3 days after the night in the Hall of the Sun Line. She was in a cell, where she had been put by the Volranes in the 4th month of her quiet defiance, and where she had been forgotten in the chaos of the weeks that followed. She had been writing letters to a Carnholt king on candle ends with the soot of her own dinner. She had been right, as it turned out, to begin doing so the morning after Maivra had vomited into her wash basin for the 3rd time and refused, with a steady chin, to explain why. The queen sat with her for an hour the day she was brought up from the cell. What was said between them is not in the records. Weena lived another 7 years in a small house on the palace grounds, and she died on a spring afternoon with the queen's hand in hers. She is buried in the royal garden under a willow. Idris Caspian of Sothmere learned to walk on the morning of his 1st birthday. He took 5 steps across the rug, fell into his father's hands, and laughed. Caspian looked at the laughter on his son's face the way a man looks at a sunrise he had stopped expecting to see, and Maivra, watching them from her chair, set her hand against the soft new curve of her belly where, 6 weeks earlier, the bond had told her without consulting any midwife that there was someone new on the way. Caspian. He looked up. Again, she said. He understood at once. When? In the autumn. He set Idris gently on the rug, came across the room, knelt in front of her chair, and laid his head against the place she had laid her hand. The second child was a girl. They named her Leona because Maivra had asked, and Caspian had, after a long silence, said yes. Riven of Carnholt came south for the naming. He stood in the small chapel at the end of the palace garden, and when the high speaker, the new one, lifted the child to be named, the rival Alpha King who had once carried Maivra out of a cathedral pressed the back of his hand against his eyes, and did not, for 3 breaths, look at anyone. When the naming was done, Caspian set his daughter in Riven's arms. She is yours as much as ours, he said, by the debt I owe and by the name she carries. Do not be a stranger to her, Riven. Do not be a stranger to any of us. You have a house in Sothmere now. Use it. Riven held the small dark girl, looked down at her, then at Maivra, and said quietly, "Thank you, my lady, for carrying her name into a place where it could be spoken again. I have not heard it said by a child's voice in 9 years. I had forgotten what it sounded like." "She will say it for you," Maivra said. "Often." He laughed. That night, after the chapel and the feast and the long, slow business of putting 2 small children to bed in a nursery built within sight of the king's own chambers, Maivra stood at the window and felt her husband come up behind her. He did not speak. He set his hands on her shoulders. He laid his chin against her hair. The mark on her hip pulsed warm and even, the steady beat of a thing that had finished being tested. "Caspian?" "Yes." "Do you remember the orchard?" "Every night." "Do you remember what you said to me? The first time, before you knew my name?" "I remember." "Say it again." He bent his head, and into the soft place behind her ear he said, in the voice he had used when he was 28, and certain of nothing in his life except the woman he had just decided to love, "There is no one else. There has never been anyone else. There will not be anyone else. Until the last fire of the sun line goes out, and after, and after, and after. Maivra." The wolves of Sothmere, on the high walls of the palace, lifted their heads to the spring moon. The wolves of Carnholt, at their camp beyond the eastern gate, answered them. And in the nursery, 2 small children, who would one day rule one kingdom between them and walk easily across the borders of another, slept on, under a roof that no cup, no council, no banner, and no fire would ever take from them again.